starting with accidents you may have heard about, and descending into stories that were buried, covered up, and settled into silence. This is the Theme Park Iceberg. Level 1 starts at Hersheypark in 1987, a brand new ride, 2 weeks after opening, and a raft full of children thrown into churning water. The Canyon River Rapids at Hersheypark in Pennsylvania opened in May 1987 to enormous excitement. The ride sent 6-person spinning rafts through 1,700 feet of twisting currents and artificial waterfalls. The only official caution printed on the signage warned that riders would get wet. 2 weeks after opening, 6 passengers, including 4 children, were thrown into churning water when their raft flipped completely over midway through the course. Investigators found a combination of contributing factors, including water flow speed, uneven weight distribution among passengers, and a design flaw in the channel itself. The raft had hit a wide section of the waterway, been caught sideways in the current, and overturned. Everyone survived, but injuries ranged from cuts and bruises to near-drowning experiences. Hersheypark shut the ride immediately, narrowed the dangerous section, adjusted the water flow, and stationed staff at intervals along the route. A preventable design flaw that took 2 weeks and 6 injured children to identify. The Runaway mine train at Alton Towers went further. On July 20, 2006, the ride was carrying 46 passengers up a lift hill when one of the couplings snapped. The front cars separated from the rest of the train and rolled backwards, slamming into the remaining cars inside a tunnel. 6 passengers were hospitalized. 2 were airlifted with spinal damage and internal injuries. Park management described it as an isolated incident with no prior history of problems. The passengers who had just been thrown into tunnel walls at full speed had a different perspective. In Scotland, on June 26, 2016, the Tsunami roller coaster at M&D's theme park in Motherwell delivered something worse. 5 cars on the inverted coaster detached mid-ride, slammed into a support structure, and plunged nearly 20 feet to the ground. The wreckage landed upside down directly on the toddler's ride below. 10 people, including 8 children, were injured, and a 12-year-old girl sustained critical head trauma. When investigators examined the wreckage, they found the ride had been repaired using the wrong type of welding metal. In 2019, the park admitted health and safety failures and was fined £65,000. It was not even the first serious incident on that ride. In 2011, 9 people had been stranded 60 feet in the air for 8 hours after the lift chain snapped. The park kept operating it anyway. Descends into incidents where the safety equipment itself became the weapon. A harness that snapped on the first flip. A grandmother killed by a spinning car she never even boarded. And a grandmother's last act of love before a park's negligence ended her life. The feedback ride at Worlds of Wonder Park in India is a high-intensity pendulum attraction where riders are simultaneously spinning in a circle, swaying on swinging arms, and rotating independently in their pods. The entire experience relies entirely on shoulder harnesses. On June 25, 2017, on the very first flip of the ride, one harness snapped open. The man inside was thrown from his seat and slammed headfirst into an iron step below before tumbling into the bushes beneath the structure. Somehow he survived with only minor injuries. The ride did not stop. Seconds later, a second harness failed on a different rider who began slipping from her seat. A passenger beside her grabbed hold and kept her inside for 45 agonizing seconds until the ride finally slowed to a halt. The operator fled when confronted by furious guests. Management later issued a statement calling it a technical fault and pointing to millions of visitors served without serious injury. They also admitted in the same statement that the ride had no emergency brakes due to its size and speed. It could only be slowed by cutting thrust and waiting for the pendulum to wind down on its own. The broader context was even more damning. For years, Indian amusement parks had operated without specific safety laws. They were not legally required to conduct safety checks, audit rides, or investigate accidents. Nobody was ever held accountable. At Six Flags New Orleans on August 13, 2003, 52-year-old Rosa Donaldson was at the park with her 4-year-old grandson on a summer afternoon. They made their way to Joker's Jukebox, a small, low-speed spinning attraction just a few feet off the ground with 30 cars rotating on 6 arms. Rosa stepped into the restricted zone to check that her grandson's harness was properly secured. The operator started the ride while she was still inside the zone. One of the spinning cars struck her in the head. Another hit her body. She collapsed, bleeding. Her pelvis was crushed, and she died before doctors could save her. 2 years later, Hurricane Katrina flooded the park beyond repair, and it was permanently closed. It stands abandoned today, a rotting structure that never reopened after a grandmother died trying to make sure her grandson was safe. Introduces the Trailblazer stand-up coaster that operated for less than a month before a woman was ripped from her seat mid-ride. and a 17-year-old maintenance worker killed during a routine morning check before the park even opened. In 1984, Six Flags Over Mid-America converted an existing mine train into one of the first stand-up roller coasters in the country. They called it Trailblazer. The cars were fitted with upright restraints designed to hold riders standing through high-speed curves. It was marketed as state-of-the-art. It barely lasted 3 weeks. On July 9th, Stella Holcomb and her husband Carl were riding in the back row. Their teenage daughter and her boyfriend were seated in the row directly in front of them. Partway through the ride, right after the second lift hill where the train twisted into a tight spiral, Stella was gone. Her husband said they were holding hands when the car jerked violently and she was ripped from her seat, nearly pulling him out with her. Witnesses saw her fly from the ride, strike a tree, and fall to the ground. She died later that day. When the train returned to the station, every one of Stella's restraints was still locked in place. Park officials suggested she may have fainted and slipped through. Carl disputed that completely. The autopsy backed him up. The restraints on the Trailblazer could appear locked and pass visual inspection, yet fail to hold a rider through the forces of the actual ride. The stand-up cars were scrapped immediately. The track reverted to its original sit-down configuration. The entire experiment was over in less than a month. At Beach Bend Park on August 30th, 1975, 17-year-old Mark Gaines was performing routine morning maintenance on the Jet Star coaster before the park opened. His task was to remove the wooden blocks that kept the cars in place overnight. As he bent down to remove them, one of the coaster cars swung through the track unexpectedly and slammed into him. He was taken to hospital and pronounced dead on arrival from massive head trauma and a broken neck. A state investigation cleared the park of responsibility, but the ride was permanently closed anyway. The park understood that public trust in the attraction could not survive what had happened to a 17-year-old boy doing his job before a single guest had passed through the gates that morning. The Rolling Thunder dual-track wooden coaster at Six Flags Great Adventure in New Jersey claimed its own victim in a different way. On August 16, 1981, 20-year-old park employee Scott Tyler got on the ride before opening for what should have been a routine test run. He was ejected mid-ride and fell to his death. Investigators ruled out mechanical failure. The ride was structurally sound and the safety bars functioned correctly. The conclusion was that Tyler had climbed out from under the safety bar and was holding on with his hands as the train accelerated through curves at around 35 miles per hour. No grip can last against those forces. Rolling Thunder reopened 2 days after his death and continued operating until 2013. The Ladybug coaster at Adventureland Park in New York looked like the safest ride in any park. Bright red cars with black dots moving at barely 5 miles per hour with tiny dips along a track built for small children. In August 2005, 18-year-old Stephen Gray, who had worked at the park for 2 summers, was wrapping up a final ride before closing. The coaster was creeping back toward the loading platform at barely 5 miles per hour when he lost his footing and fell face down onto the track. The front car struck him before anyone could react. Co-workers and guests tried to lift the car by hand for 10 minutes, but could not move it. Stephen was taken to hospital with massive internal injuries and died in the early hours of the morning. Investigators found no mechanical faults. The ride had functioned exactly as designed. What made the week of horror at Adventureland truly staggering was that the very next day a woman was ejected from an entirely different ride at the same park and also did not survive. Moves to a Ferris wheel with no seatbelts or restraints of any kind, 3 girls falling 40 feet, and an investigation that concluded the absence of basic safety equipment was completely legal. On August 8, 2016, at the Greenville County Fair in Tennessee, 10-year-old Kayla Reynolds, her 6-year-old sister Briley, and a 16-year-old friend were riding a Ferris wheel when their gondola snagged on another car and flipped over. All 3 fell more than 40 feet to the ground. Kayla suffered an arm injury. The 16-year-old was initially listed in critical condition. 6-year-old Briley had a severe brain injury and had to be intubated at the scene before she could even be transported to hospital. When investigators examined the ride, they confirmed that the gondola had no seatbelts and no arm restraints of any kind. They also confirmed that this was not against the law. Safety features of that kind were considered voluntary for that ride design, and their absence was not a violation of any regulation. After the accident, the fair shut down all mechanical rides. The following year, it returned without its Ferris wheel. The Treetop Twister at Lightwater Valley in North Yorkshire opened in May 2001 and 3 weeks later killed 20-year-old Gemma Savage when her car collided head-on with another mid-ride. Investigators found that a wiring flaw in the ride's control system allowed operators to override the built-in safety mechanisms, meaning the ride could keep moving when it should have been stopped. An engineer had been trying to manually lower cars that had stalled when the ride's computer triggered a safety halt. By not engaging the emergency stop button first, he allowed both the software and his own override to operate simultaneously, and the collision followed. Lightwater Valley, the manufacturer Reversion Industries, and the electrician were collectively fined a combined £155,000. For Gemma's family, the fines were irrelevant. 3 years after her death in 2004, the inquest returned a verdict of death by misadventure, a legal term meaning a death related to a risk taken willingly. Her family had hoped for unlawful killing. They did not get it. The twister continued operating. In 2015, a young female employee was nearly killed when a coworker started the ride as a joke while she was still in the track area. In 2019, a 7-year-old boy fell 15 feet from the same ride and sustained life-threatening head injuries. The park was fined £349,000, and the ride was finally dismantled that same year. The Willard's Whizzer at Great America in California had been bumping trains into each other in the station for years before anyone died. Between 1976 and 1979, at least 11 crashes were recorded at the Santa Clara Park alone. Marriott Corporation, the company operating the parks, never reported the pattern to the Consumer Product Safety Commission, not once across more than a decade of documented incidents. On March 29, 1983, teen-year-old Kyle Foss was stepping into a waiting train when a second train came in too fast with no sign of slowing and slammed into the back at full speed. Kyle was thrown onto the track and run over. He died from severe internal injuries. Marriott was fined $70,000 for failing to report the danger. They added seatbelts, improved the brakes, and quietly dropped the Willard's name. The ride became simply the Whizzer. The Illinois version still operates today at Six Flags Great America. Goes to Action Park in New Jersey, a place so dangerous its wave pool had its own nickname among local visitors. They called it the Grave Pool. For valid reasons. Action Park in New Jersey in the 1980s operated on a philosophy that could best be described as consequences optional. Its wave pool measured 100 by 250 feet and was packed with nearly 1,000 people at a time. The waves reached over 3 feet high and ran for 20 continuous minutes, with only a 10-minute break between cycles, 4 times longer than any standard wave pool. Former employees described a specific area they called the death zone, where panicking swimmers would grab at anyone nearby trying to reach the ladders. Lifeguards would pull people out constantly. They would sometimes shut the entire pool down just to check the bottom for bodies. In 1982, 15-year-old George Lopez drowned in the pool despite lifeguards rushing to save him. In 1987, another man, Gregory Grandchamp, drowned in the same water. The pool kept running, and people kept coming because the experience was exactly as wild as advertised, and nobody in authority was making them change anything. Action Park's Alpine Slide was arguably even more reckless. A 2,700-foot concrete and fiberglass track snaked down a New Jersey mountainside with sleds controlled by a brake lever that offered riders effectively 2 speeds: agonizingly slow or catastrophic. The sleds were frequently broken, and staff would joke openly about the ride's danger while guests in bathing suits received no warnings beyond a vague sign about riding at their own risk. On July 8, 1980, 19-year-old George Larson Jr. boarded a sled without knowing the brake was broken. Seconds after leaving the start point, the sled launched off the track and hurled him 25 feet headfirst into rocks. He died 8 days later. The park owner immediately claimed George was an employee riding at night in the rain, absolving Action Park of liability. Neither claim was true. George had worked at an adjacent ski resort months earlier but was not employed by the park that summer, and the accident happened in daylight with no rain. State regulators never investigated. The park owner was influential enough in the local community that nobody pursued him. A fabricated insurance scheme using a Cayman Islands shell company let him absorb all lawsuits without consequence. The slide stayed open for years. In 1984 and 1985 alone, 14 fractures and 26 head injuries were recorded at that single attraction. On June 9, 1991, Kings Island had the worst single night in any American amusement park's history. At an Oktoberfest beer garden pond, 22-year-old Timothy Benning leaned over the water to splash a friend. A faulty submerged pump with exposed wiring had electrified the water. The moment his hand touched the surface, the shock knocked him unconscious, and he fell face down into the shallow water. His friend and a park security guard both jumped in to save him. Both were electrocuted. 2 of them died. Timothy survived with severe burns. A $20 ground fault circuit breaker would have prevented all of it. 1 hour later, and less than a mile away within the same park, 32-year-old Candy Taylor boarded Flight Commander alone. The ride's open-air pods spun riders 70 feet high using joystick controls. Taylor's capsule rolled sharply left, and when it inverted, she slipped through the gap between the seat divider and the restraint, fell headfirst onto the concrete, and died. Her blood alcohol content was 3 times Ohio's legal driving limit, and her limp body had slid past restraints that exposed a fatal design flaw. By midnight, helicopters had airlifted 3 bodies from the same park. The local media named it Black Sunday, and it has never been forgotten. Opens with 8 teenagers burned alive in a haunted attraction at Six Flags Great Adventure that had ignored 5 years of fire safety warnings and operated under a legal loophole that allowed it to bypass sprinklers and smoke detectors entirely. 22 incidents, and the thread connecting all of them is not freak accidents or unavoidable mechanical failures. It is the same short list of decisions made by the same category of people. Cut the maintenance budget, override the safety system, ignore the inspector's warning, trust the light on the panel without checking the seat. Classify the structure as temporary so the fire codes don't apply. Hire a designer with no engineering background because he had a vision. Keep the ride running because the queue is long and the tickets are sold. Every single time the consequence lands on someone who just came to have fun. Subscribe for more and drop a comment telling us which level hit you hardest. Which level hit you hardest. Which level hit you